Let's have an overview of airline economics. This is a very complicated and detailed topic. Doing justice to it in just one lecture may not be really feasible, but I'll try to only touch upon some introductory aspects. In fact, there can be a full semester course on this topic, and there are several textbooks available which focus only on the topic of airline economics. After all, airlines are an important part of the air transportation industry and they are driven by business. So, therefore, economics plays a very major role. Let us have an idea about how. So, the overview of today's talk is we will look at what governs the economics of airlines. We will look at what are the various costs incurred by an airline, and then we look at the breakup of these costs in terms of the direct operating cost DOC and the indirect operating cost IOC. We then move to airline demand and how it is predicted, and this is a major area of research. We will touch upon a few measures of airline efficiency or productivity which are currently used in the industry. Let us start with the question about what governs the economics of the airlines. Airlines, as you can appreciate, is a capital and resource intensive industry. The cost of each aircraft can go to 1,500 crore rupees. You can imagine how much is the investment required in setting up and operating an airline. Not just the aircraft, you have to look at the complete infrastructure, support systems, manpower. Then the airline business suffers from a lot of seasonality. Demand changes from season to season and it is very much a function of festivals and special events and special days. There is yearly seasonality, there is a weekly seasonality, there is a daily seasonality, and in some cases there could even be an hourly seasonality in the operation of an airline. And therefore, the management efficiency is very important. Airlines run on a very thin margin and therefore, any bleeding of cash or resources can quickly convert a profitable airline into a loss-making one. On the other hand, careful attention to details and cost management can convert it can take you from red to black. So, because airlines operate in a very complex environment, there are many internal and external factors which affect the airline. Yield management is another very huge research area and a very important area which makes or breaks an airline. In yield management, we try to manage the trip cost per seat per mile, and to do that we need to strongly correlate cost and revenues per unit and ensure that the costs are always kept below the revenue. Then there is an important effect of load factor versus break-even load factor. The load factor basically means the percentage of seats or percentage of cargo space which is occupied or filled up in a flight on an average as compared to the maximum number of seats available or the maximum cargo space available. You could measure load factor for every trip or for a group of trips, that is why I use the word average. But then there is something called as break-even load factor, that is the load factor which is required so that the total operating cost is recovered. The break-even load factor could be 30%, 40% for some airlines. It could be even higher for some airlines under certain operating conditions. Okay. So, just because an airline is flying full does not mean that it will be always profitable. There are instances when airlines with very high load factor have also been commercially unviable. So, somehow filling the passengers in the aircraft is not the only motive. Yield management is very important. Okay, let us have a look at the costs which the airline has to grapple with. What determines the cost of the airline? So, the price that an airline charges in the form of a ticket to the passengers, it is a function of the stage length or the distance to be travelled and the relative operating cost. Okay. Now, on certain routes you might get subsidies or support from the government. These are called as the social obligation routes. Okay. So, therefore, in these routes the operating costs are high, and therefore, you cannot operate these routes unless there is some financial support available from the government. Then the airline costs are also a strong function of the operating scenario, presence of other airlines and competition, and all other factors which are related to the operating scenario. They may play a major role in the cost determination. Then there are distribution costs, costs that are involved in selling the product, dealing with the travel agents and distributing. Then there are overheads which are inevitable but have to be kept as low as possible to keep the costs under control, and the costs also depend on what kind of product an airline is offering. If you are a low cost airline or a budget airline, then you may not be offering many services that are available under a full service airline, such as the free beverages and food or refreshments in the aircraft. Okay. Now, most airlines follow 4 types of seating. They are the first class, the business class, the economy class, and in between the business and economy, many airlines have now introduced an in between term called as the premium economy. So, let us look at these classes. Okay, here is the first class. In the first class, you have virtually a separate small room for yourself. It will be difficult for people to imagine that what we are seeing is actually one seat available to a business class passenger in an aircraft. The window on the left hand side is a giveaway, otherwise it looks like a small hotel room. That is the first class. You have your own independent large scale TV, you get food on your table with a choice of beverages and refreshments. You have a long large bed for you to have a nice sleep and a very comfortable seating. Then we come to the business class, which is one shade lower than the first class. Business class also offers individual facility and seating and comfortable zones for the passengers. Then we have economy class, a class in which the bulk of the people travel, wherein seat spacing is limited, facilities are limited, and there is no private space in economy class. And as I mentioned, between economy and business, there is one class called as premium economy, where some facilities from the economy are upgraded, but not to the same level as in the business class. So, you have slightly wider seats, you have less number of people across maybe, but you have better food choices and little bit more comfortable seating. It is important to discuss why the cost structure should be defined. Why is it necessary to define the cost structures, especially in the operation of an airline? This is because it can be used as a management and accounting tool, because it can be used to measure cost versus operational efficiency. Okay. It also is useful in measuring the operating and non-operating profit and loss of the business of an airline. It is helpful in determining the productivity ratios, and also it helps us to determine any charges to be made for offering the products and services in terms of price. Okay. So, it is very important for cost structures to be defined. Now, How do we categorize the costs of an airline? There are two main categories. The first is called as the direct operating cost, which is related to the operation of the aircraft, directly connected with the ops of the aircraft, and then you have the indirect operating cost, which basically is to support the airline operations. Okay. These are the indirect costs. Now, further you can categorize them as variable costs, and these are related to the flight operations and they are not incurred if the operations are reduced or stopped, and if the demand fluctuates, the variable costs can be reduced to some extent. And then you have fixed costs which are related to airline operations, which may not be reducible. Okay. They are incurred irrespective of the flight operations. Whether or not you fly, you will have to pay for the cost of the aircraft or the loan that you have taken, you have to pay the installment for that, whether the aircraft is flying or it is on ground. So, there are certain fixed costs which are always there. Let us have a look at the variable components of DOC. The primary element of the DOC is the fuel and the oil cost. Fuel is a very large component of the DOC. It could be as high as 30 to 40% or even more in certain operating scenarios. Right. Then you have maintenance costs. This is not including the spares, this is just to maintain the aircraft in safe condition and airworthiness is ensured. Then you have landing charges, RNFC or route navigation and facilitation charges, and passenger handling charges. These three charges are levied by the airport to the airline when they operate at an airport. Then you have crew salaries and allowances. A large expenditure of the crew is towards their allowances, which are based on the flying hours that they put in. Then there are catering and other cabin amenities which have to be provided, plus there will be travelling and hotel expenses for the crew members, and there will be commission to the travel agents. All these components are variable and they change from place to place, city, country to country, and depending on the scenario in which you operate, these numbers could be different. But then there are some fixed components of DOC which do not change. For example, the leasing or the financing of an aircraft for the acquisition of the aircraft is going to be a fixed component. Similarly, the insurance that you pay for the hull and for the passengers and the staff, all of that is also a fixed component of DOC. Then maintenance will vary from the operations and the scenario where you are operating, but the overheads are going to be the same. The operating staff salaries are going to be also fixed. The reservation systems and the charges that you incur to provide this service also is a fixed cost, and there is a fixed rental of the airport premises. So, all these are the fixed components of DOC. Now, let us move ahead to the indirect operating cost or IOC. IOC also has many components, and it is very difficult to determine because it is a function of the business side of the things. For example, the office space that you require, the cost of advertising your product, the cost of communications network to be provided, the costs incurred in having enough legal support and services, the other overheads and administrative costs, all of these are coming under the indirect cost of operation or the IOC. Most of these are not related to directly to the type of the aircraft you fly, the number of routes you fly, and also on the type of routes you fly. They are almost fixed or invariant with the operations. Okay. Now, let us look at unit operating cost or UOC versus the number of passengers for the same distance or the stage length by two different aircraft. One, a small aircraft like Dornier 228, which can handle at best 19 seats. It is unpressurized, it is meant for low distances, it does not climb to very high altitudes, versus an airliner like this one, which is having much larger number of seats. So, if you look at Dornier 228 new generation aircraft, it has 19 seats. The unit operating cost, that is the cost incurred in rupees per kilometer traveled, will be very high, and the overhead costs will be much lower per trip because it will be mostly a no frill service. On the other hand, if you operate an aircraft like A321neo, you will have 10 times more seats, approximately 190 seats, and therefore the operating cost per seat per passenger is going to be lower, but you have to provide higher quality of service, and therefore you need to incur lots of costs coming towards the overheads. Let us also have a look now at how airline tries to control these costs. There are two kinds of factors. One is the factors that cannot be influenced by an airline. These are extraneous to the airlines, on which the airline has no control. Fuel and oil rates, these are determined by market forces. Of course, the airline can hedge the risk by hedging, but it is a limited scheme, right. Then you have the landing, route navigation, facilitation charges and pax handling charges. These are also fixed by agencies out of your control. They are fixed by the country in which you are operating. Crew salaries and allowances are also pre-negotiated and generally fixed. But there are factors which can be influenced by the airline through a prudent selection of the type of the aircraft and the age of the aircraft. Now, if you look at young aircraft, you will incur less cost over maintenance and support and overall, but they will be costing high upfront. Then you have to look at the distribution costs. These can also be controlled by the airline. So, you can look at the product cost and you can look at the overhead cost. Some of these costs you might be able to handle by careful planning and by bringing in certain schemes. Now, let us look at the measures for lowering the costs. So, you can reduce cost by leveraging technology. Okay. Then if you use, as I mentioned, modern and young aircraft fleet, then you will have lower operating cost economics. If you can outsource many of your activities, then you can save on manpower costs and also the operating costs in general. Many fixed costs can be reduced by outsourcing. There are many airlines who do not necessarily have staff stationed at every place where they fly. I remember once I had travelled to Tehran for an official work. I realized that the staff members at Mumbai airport who were doing the complete work for Iran Air, they were actually from Air India. So, the Air India had outsourced its manpower to Iran Air for providing the terminal services. Okay. You can also do a lot of cost reduction by re-engineering and downsizing, and there are many examples in the industry of how both these things can be used to reduce the costs. Let us have a look at how the unit cost changes with the unit operating cost changes with the distance that you travel. Okay. In general, you have a curve like this, where on the x-axis you have the stage length and on the y-axis you have the operating cost per distance. So, this is broadly true. As the distance between the city pairs decreases, the operating cost per distance increases. So, as we move on the left of this curve, at smaller and smaller stage lengths, the operating cost per kilometer is going to increase. Now, we delve into the world of airline demand estimation and prediction, which is, as I mentioned, a very complex area, but still let us have a very brief and very quick look at what things are involved. What drives the demand for air travel? There are many factors. In many scenarios, these factors change. Broadly speaking, the distance between city pairs is one important factor that determines how much will be the demand. The more far away and the less connected the city pairs are, the larger will be the demand. Then if there are any business links or interaction between city pairs because of certain other considerations, that is what drives demand. Certain places have demand because of pilgrimage travel. Okay. It may not have any requirement from business, but because of tourism or because of pilgrimage, there may be a huge demand to that place. There you have to also look at what is the convenience of air travel versus other modes. For example, transportation from the mainland India to Andaman and Nicobar Islands, you can do by two ways. You can go by ship or you can go by air. Now going by ship might take 6 or 7 days time. Going by air may take about 2.5 hours. So definitely, if it is very convenient to travel by air, more people who can afford it will travel by air between the mainland to Andaman and Nicobar Islands as compared to those who travel by ship. Then you have to look at what is the considerations of time and money saved by incurring the journey by air. Now one has to also look at the price that you charge. If the price is too high and it is not in nearby the price of the other modes of transport like rail and road, then you might not see a lot of air travel demand. But the primary consideration for leisure travel is the disposable income that is available. As the disposable income of the population increases, the demand for leisure travel definitely increases. Okay. So the contribution and increase in leisure traffic puts pressure on the yields, and that actually is a function of the price and income sensitivity. Large availability of knowledge based internet of faraway tourist locations has slowly increased the demand for travel to places where people were not going in the past because of lack of knowledge, but now people are traveling. So if you pick up any of the in-flight magazines of domestic airlines, you will find that they propagate and they inform you about interesting locations where or near where they operate their flights, which could be possible tourist destinations for you, and many a times you get motivated by that. Let us have a look at measures for calculating demand. The extent of affluence of a society directly affects the demand for air travel. Sometimes you may have a lot of distance between cities, but if the people are not affluent, they do not have disposable income, they cannot afford, then they will still travel by bus or by road or by train. The traffic statistics of origin and destination also is very useful in measures for calculating demand. The convenience of flying and the flight frequency, if there are airports near where you are concentrated and if the frequency is suitable, allowing you to meet your requirements very quickly, then you will be having a higher propensity for air travel. There are many micro environmental impacts that trickle down. There is an important point is to evaluate external factors that influence travel demand. There are many factors which might influence travel demand, which may not be necessarily internal, they may be external. For example, you have to look at the range of the forecasts associated with different assumptions. Then you have to also look at what are the prospective developments for other surface modes. When a country embarks on building much better road infrastructure, much better rail infrastructure, when the country invests more money in that, then it can happen that travel by road may become far more attractive and far more desirable as compared to travel by air, because then you can have point to point transportation with your own personal vehicle or with a rented vehicle. The data sources and methods that minimize the uncertainty, this is very important when you are predicting or estimating the demand for travel. Okay, now we want to look at what are the key determinants of air demand. First of all, it depends upon who is traveling, the nationality, whether it is an adult or a child, whether it is a male or a female. Adults have more propensity for travel compared to children, male more than female. And certain nationalities who are used to air travel like the Americans, they would prefer to go by air travel. How do they travel? Do they travel by a scheduled airline or they take a chartered flight? What kind of market share is there for every airline, and what is the interline traffic? That also determines the demand. Where do they go? Are they going to gateway airports? Are there any true origin destination routes or frequency of visits? All that affects determinants. Then when do they go? Is it just an annual traffic or is it regular? Is it seasonal? Is there a specific time of the day when the demand is more? Why are they traveling? Is it on business? Is it on pleasure? Is it government and others? certain routes are there, for example, in the northeast or in Jammu Kashmir in India, where travel happens primarily because of government requirements and also because of tourism. Okay. And then how much? How much are you paying for the flight? What are the passengers by the fare class, and what are the yields realized? All of these factors are the determinants of demand for air travel. How do you calculate demand? You look at trend projections. Okay. Whenever the historical traffic growth has been steady, the projections tend to work very well. But you cannot use it for looking at the demand for new routes or new areas. Also, we expect good results when no major environmental changes are expected during the study period. Otherwise, there could be sudden changes in the projections. We look at econometric relationships when traffic is influenced by many environmental factors. We look at marketed industry surveys which tell us where the market is moving and where the industry is going to emerge. This is very useful for new or immature markets. Okay. Then the end result of the method to calculate demand could be a combination of all these parameters together. And finally, there is nothing to beat sound judgment to consolidate the different conclusions, because this is not a very straightforward area. It requires a lot of experience and insight to be able to actually calculate the demand for travel very accurately. Let us have a look at the price and income elasticities of demand. Elasticity of demand is defined as change in the demand with change in any of the causal variables. Okay. So, predicting and price and income elasticity of demand is defined based on changes to GDP and or the prices. As GDP increases, generally there is a larger increase in the demand. As per the recent study by NCAR, the income elasticity of demand is approximately 1.1% positive. That means, as income increases, there is a positive correlation of 1.1. If the price elasticity, you can see there is a negative correlation of 0.6. So, income elasticity is more important than price elasticity, which means that merely reducing the cost of that flight ticket or the price does not necessarily boost demand as much as increase in the income levels of the population. Okay. Now, finally, we look at some of the airline efficiency and productivity indices and their validity. This is just a list of KPIs or key performance indicators for air transportation. As far as the airline is concerned, the percentage utilization of the aircraft is a very good indication of how efficiently the airline is being operating. On time performance is a good indication. Technical dispatch reliability, how many flights are cancelled because of technical reasons, that affects the dispatch reliability. This number should be of the order of 98-99% for a good airline, so that people can depend on it for meeting their transportation requirements. Per unit yields, revenue passenger kilometer and revenue per available seat kilometer are two measures by which you can find out how efficiently you are operating. So, revenue per RPK is how much revenue earned divided by how much revenue you could earn per seat per kilometer. Now, per unit cost, that is cost per available seat kilometer. An airline provides seats and travels some kilometers. If you take the sum of all the, if you take the multiplication of all the seats and all the kilometers that you travel, all that becomes the available seat kilometer. And what is the cost incurred per ASK? That is another way of looking at the KPI. Some airlines, they spend a lot of their revenue, gross revenue, towards promoting their product. So, how much is the advertising cost as a percentage of gross revenue is one more KPI. Load factor versus the break-even load factor is another KPI. Okay. The BELF should be as low as possible, so that you can fly profitably in most of the cases. This is how the break-even load factor BELF varies with the seating capacity. As you make the aircraft larger, okay, the BELF reduces, because when you are increasing the number of passengers, with less number of passengers you are able to recover your operating cost. But this is only true if the seats go full. If the seats go empty, then this is not really true. So, for a good airline which is operating at a high load factor, the break-even load factor reduces as the aircraft size becomes bigger, and this is why an airline would like to fly the largest possible aircraft that it can fill. For example, there are some airlines in Japan which are operating an Airbus A380 between two cities in Japan. That is because they can get passengers to fill the aircraft. So, if it is possible to get so many passengers, it is good to fly the largest available aircraft that you have, because the cost economics works in your advantage. Some other KPIs, ASK per employee. Now, airline business is very much employee based, and if the labor costs have to be kept under control, you can find out how much transportation facility are you providing per employee that you have. Similarly, how much revenue per kilometer, how much revenue per passenger per kilometer are you earning per employee? What is the ROI on the investments that you are getting? What is the debt to equity ratio of an organization? What is the earning per share of the company? All these are indications of KPIs of an airline. Moving ahead, here is a graph that shows the change in the per unit cost and the change in per unit yield, okay, and that particular point is the profitable region. That is the break-even point where the per unit cost matches the per unit yield. Notice that costs are much higher than the yield at lower values. So, yields are governed by market forces, hence the cost curve needs to align very tightly with the yield curve. The profitable region is very small, and therefore, we say that the margins are generally quite thin. Thank you for your attention.